Hello friends, thank you for joining me. Let us ride into another Western tale. Let's go.
Sometimes, the most important journeys are not found on any map. They begin when a stranger's path crosses our own, changing our destiny forever. The sign for the Silver Creek homestead hung by a single rusted nail, groaning in the wind. For Abigail Rose, this piece of Montana land was all that remained of her father. Each day was a fight against the thirsty soil, mending fences and tending to cattle that grew thinner with each passing week. Since her father's death, loneliness had become her constant shadow. One afternoon, as the sun baked the grass to a crisp, she spotted a column of dust on the horizon. A rider. Her heart tightened with a familiar dread. Uninvited guests rarely brought good news. She silently picked up her father's old rifle from its place by the door and waited, her knuckles white. As the rider drew closer, she saw a powerful figure on a bay horse. The man was tall, with broad shoulders encased in a buckskin shirt. His long, dark hair was woven into a single braid, adorned with an eagle feather. He stopped his horse at a safe distance, raising a hand in a clear sign of peace. His face, weathered and stern, showed no malice, only a deep weariness. His eyes were calm, like a deep river, and they held none of the cunning shiftiness Abigail had learned to recognize in the eyes of strangers who wandered through these harsh lands. His steady gaze met hers without challenge, acknowledging her caution. "Good day," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "My name is Kalen. My horse is lame, and I have not had a warm meal in 3 days. May I offer my labor for a plate of stew?" Abigail hesitated. Trusting a stranger was a dangerous gamble. But before she could answer, another rider appeared over the hill. It was Cornelius Sterling, their wealthy neighbor whose land bordered hers. He looked Kalen over with disdain, then turned to Abigail with a false, oily smile. "Abigail, my dear child, I have come again with my offer. Sell me this barren land. You know it is worthless. I will give you a fair price. This land was my father's legacy, Mr. Sterling." "It is not for sale," she replied, her voice firm. Sterling's face twisted into a sneer, his eyes flicking back to Kalen. "Keeping company with savages now. Be careful, child. His kind brings only trouble." With that, he turned his horse and rode away, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a bitter silence. Abigail looked at Kalen. Now, her choice was clear. Having another pair of hands, even temporarily, felt like the only right decision. "The water trough is over there for your horse," she said, nodding. "I will put a bowl of stew on the table." Kalen worked with a quiet, focused efficiency. He did not just mend the broken fence, he reinforced it with a skill that spoke of long practice. Abigail watched from the porch, her initial wariness slowly giving way to a grudging respect. He moved with a purpose and economy of motion that was both captivating and reassuring. Each swing of his hammer was precise, each knot he tied was secure. He worked as if the land itself was his partner, understanding its needs without needing to be told. She saw in his labor a profound respect for the simple, necessary tasks of survival, a respect she shared. Later, inside the small cabin, she maintained a careful distance as he ate. He consumed his meal slowly, deliberately, like a man who had known true hunger and appreciated every bite. She found herself observing the contrast between his powerful build and the gentleness of his hands as he held the spoon. In the flickering lamplight, the silence between them was not awkward. It was a space filled with unspoken questions and the shared weariness of a long day. For the first time in months, the cabin did not feel so vast and empty. His presence was a quiet anchor in the lonely expanse of her world. The next morning, she awoke to the sound of steady work already underway. Kalen had not only finished the fence, but had also repaired the leaky roof of the small barn and cleared the mud from the well pump that had been stuck for a week. He asked for nothing, simply seeing what needed to be done and doing it. His foresight and initiative were qualities she had not seen in any man since her father. A feeling she had long forgotten began to stir within her, a sense of security. The constant weight of her solitude seemed to lift, just a little, under the quiet competence of his presence. As evening approached, he began to gather his sparse belongings, preparing to sleep in the shed before moving on at dawn. Abigail felt a pang of a feeling she could not name. The thought of the ranch falling silent again was unbearable. "I have another roof that needs patching," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "The main cabin. It could use your skill. Another day's work for another meal?" He looked at her, and in his dark eyes she saw a flicker of understanding. He gave a single, solemn nod. A silent agreement was made, a small promise against the encroaching loneliness of the night. That evening they sat on the porch, nursing mugs of hot coffee as the stars began to appear in the vast, dark sky. The day's work was done, and a comfortable quiet settled between them. Breaking the silence, Abigail finally asked the question that had been troubling her. "Why does Sterling want this land so badly? It is dry and difficult. He offers a good price for what he calls a worthless plot." Kalen did not answer immediately. He stared into the darkness, his expression thoughtful, as if weighing his words carefully before letting them go. The night air grew cooler around them. "Your father knew what lies beneath this soil," Kalen said at last, his voice low. "Deep under this rock runs a hidden river. It is the only constant source of water for miles in every direction. Sterling does not want the land. He wants the water. With it, he can control this entire valley. He can make everyone dependent on his goodwill." The revelation settled over Abigail with a chilling weight. It was not just greed. It was a plan for absolute power. Her father had never told her the full truth, perhaps to protect her. Now, the weight of that secret, and the danger it brought, was hers alone to bear. The following day brought a new and more direct threat. A rider approached, a man with a pockmarked face and cruel, empty eyes. It was Jedediah Pike, Sterling's hired hand. He did not dismount but sneered down at them from his horse. He uncoiled a dead rattlesnake and threw it at Abigail's feet. "A gift from Mr. Sterling," he rasped, his voice like gravel. "He says this land will soon be cleansed of all its trash." The comment was a clear and ugly threat. Abigail felt a cold knot of fear in her stomach, but she refused to let it show in her eyes. Pike's venomous gaze shifted to Kalen. "And it will be cleansed of heathens too," he added, spitting a stream of tobacco juice near Kalen's feet. Kalen's expression remained like stone, his body still, but Abigail saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. She stepped forward, her fear turning to a cold, sharp anger. "Tell your master to stay away from my home," she said, her voice steady and clear despite the trembling inside her. Pike just laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the quiet air. He turned his horse and rode off, leaving the dead snake coiled in the dust like a dark promise. That night, terror came cloaked in smoke and shadow. Abigail awoke choking, her lungs burning. A hellish orange light flickered outside her window. The barn was on fire. Panic seized her as she scrambled out of bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. She burst out of the cabin into a nightmare. Flames devoured the structure, consuming their winter hay and all their tools. Kalen was already outside, a silhouette against the inferno, his face grim as he raced to unlatch the corral gate and drive the terrified horses to safety. The roar of the fire was deafening, a hungry beast destroying their future. A sharp crack echoed through the chaos, distinct from the crackle of the fire. It was a rifle shot from the darkness. Kalen cried out and stumbled, clutching his arm as he fell to the ground. Abigail screamed his name, a raw, desperate sound torn from her throat. Forgetting all danger, she ran toward him, her only thought to reach his side. The world narrowed to the sight of him lying in the dirt, the firelight casting, dancing, monstrous shadows all around them. Fear for him was a physical blow, more painful than any flame. She had to get to him. Before she could reach him, another shot rang out. A searing pain exploded in her shoulder, and the world tilted violently. The force of the impact threw her to the ground. Her breath left her in a ragged gasp. Through a haze of pain, she saw two shadowy figures near the edge of the property. They hesitated for a moment, then melted back into the night, their cruel work done. The last thing she saw before the darkness claimed her was the burning skeleton of the barn against the star-filled sky, a funeral pyre for all her hopes. The scent of wood smoke and betrayal filled her senses as she slipped away. She drifted back to consciousness slowly, to the sensation of a gentle hand on her forehead. It was Kalen. He was kneeling beside her, his own arm bound in a crude bandage. His face was streaked with soot, his expression a mixture of pain and fierce determination. The barn was gone, reduced to a pile of smoldering embers. Everything they had worked for had turned to ash. Tears of despair streamed down her face. "They took everything," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Not everything," he replied softly, his voice a firm anchor in her sea of pain. "They did not take us." Abigail's wound was worse than they had feared. The impact of the bullet left a deep and dangerous wound, and by the next day, a dangerous fever had taken hold. It burned through her body, leaving her weak and lost in a fog of delirium. Kalen, despite his own injury, tended to her with a surprising gentleness. His large, capable hands, which she had seen mend fences and soothe frightened horses, were now impossibly soft as he bathed her brow with cool water. He moved with a quiet purpose, his presence a constant, reassuring warmth in the terrifying heat of her illness. Her life was in his hands. He disappeared for a time, returning from the canyons with a pouch of herbs and roots. He did not use willow bark, the common remedy. Instead, he prepared a poultice using his people's knowledge, a paste made from crushed yucca root and a specific, dark green moss that grew only in the deepest shadows of the rock formations. The remedy was one passed down through generations, a secret of the land itself. He carefully cleaned her wound and applied the paste, his touch firm but tender. Its earthy scent filled the small cabin, a fragrance of ancient healing and faint hope. For days, Abigail hovered in the twilight between life and death. In her fever dreams, she saw faces, her father's, kind and sad, Sterling's, twisted with greed, Pike's, a mask of cruel emptiness. Through it all, Kalen's voice was her lifeline. He stayed by her side, speaking to her in low tones, telling her quiet stories of the spirits of the mountains and the wisdom of the wind. He did not offer empty platitudes, but shared the strength of his own world, weaving a thread of connection that held her fast to the living. His voice was the one thing that felt real. When the fever finally broke, she awoke to find him asleep in a chair beside her bed, his head slumped in exhaustion. His face was drawn and tired, but in sleep, it was peaceful. In that quiet moment, watching him, a profound realization settled in her heart. This man was more than a hired hand, more than a protector. He had become her anchor, her salvation, the despair that had crushed her spirit after the fire was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. Her gaze fell upon her bandaged shoulder, then drifted to the window. "Sterling will pay for this," she vowed softly. They both knew that seeking help from the law in Silver River was useless. The sheriff was a man bought and paid for by Sterling's money. They were on their own. Justice would have to be forged with their own hands. As soon as he was able, Kalen returned to the blackened ruins of the barn. His eyes, trained to see what others missed, scanned the scorched ground with intense focus. He moved like a phantom through the ash and debris, sifting, searching, his mind a sharp tool against the chaos of the scene. He was not just looking, he was reading the story the embers had left behind. His patience was rewarded. Half hidden beneath a charred plank, something glinted in the sunlight. He knelt and carefully brushed away the ash. It was a silver button, ornate and unique, with the initial P intricately engraved upon it. It must have torn from Pike's waistcoat during the attack. Kalen clenched it in his fist. It was a solid piece of proof, a tangible link to their attackers. But he knew it was not enough. A button could be explained away. They needed more. They needed to uncover the reason a man like Sterling would risk everything for this patch of dust. While Kalen searched the ruins, Abigail searched her memories. She recalled her father spending long nights poring over maps and documents. In his old sea chest beneath worn clothes and keepsakes, she found it. His journal. Her hands trembled as she opened the brittle pages. Inside, he had detailed his search for the underground river. More importantly, he had documented his correspondence with the federal government. A new stagecoach route was being planned, and the government had offered a substantial contract for access to a reliable water source. Everything clicked into place. Sterling knew about the contract. He wanted to seize the land before the news became public, securing the government money for himself. The journal was the motive, the key that unlocked the full scope of his greed. Now, they had a piece of physical evidence tying Pike to the crime, and a written document exposing Sterling's entire scheme. The puzzle was nearly complete. All they needed was one final piece, a witness who would be brave enough, or desperate enough, to speak the truth against the most powerful man in the valley. Under the cloak of a moonless night, they rode to the town of Silver River. Its single dusty street was quiet, with only the faint sound of a piano drifting from the Golden Spur Saloon. This was their destination. The saloon was owned by Martha, a woman with a will of iron, and an old friendship with Abigail's father. She was one of the few people in town who had ever stood up to Cornelia Sterling, who had once tried to force her out of business. They slipped through the back entrance, knowing that if they were seen, word would get back to Sterling before sunrise. Martha listened to their story in the dim light of her back office, her face unreadable. Abigail presented the silver button, and Kaylin explained the contents of the journal. When they finished, Martha's expression hardened into a grim mask. "I knew Sterling was a snake, but I did not know the pit was so deep," she said, her voice a low growl. She tapped a finger on the button. "Pike is in my saloon almost every night, drinking away Sterling's money. He is a coward at heart, ruled by fear and cheap whiskey. He can be broken." A plan began to form in her sharp mind. She knew that direct confrontation would only make Pike retreat into silence. They needed to use his own fear against him. The plan was simple but dangerous. The next evening, Pike sat at his usual table, nursing a glass of whiskey. One of Martha's trusted men, a quiet gambler named Finn, sat down across from him. Without a word, Finn slid the silver button across the table. Pike's eyes widened in recognition and terror. "A friend told me Sterling is looking to tie up loose ends," Finn whispered, his voice barely audible. "He says a careless man left something behind at a fire." Panic seized Pike. He knew Sterling's cruelty firsthand. The thought that his boss now saw him as a liability was more terrifying than any lawman. He threw a few coins on the table and scrambled out of the saloon, his mind set on fleeing town. But as he darted into the dark alley behind the building, two figures stepped out from the shadows, blocking his path. It was Kaylin and Abigail. "We know what you did, Pike," Abigail said, her voice cold and steady. "The sheriff cannot protect you from Sterling. But we can. Tell the federal marshal everything, and you might just live to see another sunrise." Cornered and trembling, Jedediah Pike saw the truth in her words. His loyalty to Sterling was born of fear, not devotion. The choice was simple: a certain end at the hands of his employer, or a chance at survival by confessing. "I will talk," he stammered, his eyes darting nervously into the darkness. "I will tell them everything. Just keep him away from me." Kaylin and Abigail exchanged a look. The first part of their plan had worked. Now, they had to ensure the law would listen. Their only hope was a man who was beyond Sterling's influence, a man who represented a higher authority. Federal Marshal Elias Warren was due in Silver River in 2 days to inspect the proposed stagecoach route. He was known as a hard, uncompromising man who valued the letter of the law above all else. Martha sent an urgent message ahead to him, requesting a private meeting regarding a matter of federal interest involving the route contract. She hinted at conspiracy and attempted murder, words she knew a man like Warren could not ignore. The marshal, intrigued, agreed to meet them at the Golden Spur Saloon upon his arrival, a neutral ground away from the sheriff's office. The trap was set. Sterling was invited to the saloon for what he believed was a private business discussion with the marshal about the water contract. He strode in with his usual arrogance, expecting to finalize his victory. Instead, he found not only Marshal Warren, but also Abigail and Kaylin standing silently in the corner. His confident smile vanished, replaced by a mask of cold fury. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice booming. "What is this savage doing in a business meeting?" "He is here as a witness, Mr. Sterling," the marshal replied calmly. "Just like Mr. Pike. On cue, Martha opened the door to her office, and a pale, terrified Jedediah Pike was escorted out. Sterling's face went white with shock and rage. Pike, avoiding his former boss's murderous gaze, recounted the entire sordid tale, the orders, the arson, the ambush. When he finished, Sterling, realizing he was cornered, made a desperate move for his firearm. But Kalen was faster. In a single fluid motion, he stepped forward and disarmed him, sending the revolver clattering to the floor. Defeated and humiliated, Cornelius Sterling was taken into custody by the marshal. With Sterling and Pike arrested and facing federal charges, a fragile peace returned to the valley. Justice, delivered not by the local sheriff but by a higher authority, had washed the town clean. The news of Sterling's treachery spread quickly, and the fear he had cultivated for years finally dissolved. Abigail, now recognized as the rightful owner of the land and its precious water, signed the government contract. The financial security it provided was more than she had ever dreamed of, a foundation upon which she could finally rebuild her life and her father's legacy. The money was useful, but the true prize was the freedom it represented. Freedom from fear, freedom from poverty, and the freedom to choose her own path. Together, she and Kalen began to rebuild the barn, their shared labor a testament to their resilience. The sounds of hammers and saws replaced the echoes of gunfire, each nail a small victory against the darkness they had faced. The ranch, once a symbol of her solitude, was now becoming a symbol of their shared strength. They worked from sunrise to sunset, finding comfort and strength in each other's presence. One warm evening, as they sat on the porch of the newly constructed barn, watching the last rays of sun paint the sky, the unspoken emotions between them finally found a voice. She reached out and placed her hand over his. The simple touch was electric, a current of all the things they had survived together. He turned his hand and gently laced his fingers through hers. It was a gesture of profound tenderness, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had been forged in fire and fear. The air was filled with the scent of fresh-cut pine and the promise of a new beginning. "I could not have done this without you," she said softly, her voice filled with a gratitude that went far beyond the rebuilding of a barn. He looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers in the fading light. "My heart had no home until I found this place," he replied, his voice a low rumble. "Until I found you." In that moment, she knew she was no longer the lonely woman who had greeted a stranger with a rifle. She was home, and she was loved. The long, solitary winter of her grief had finally given way to a hopeful spring. The years flowed by like the hidden river beneath their feet, sometimes swift, sometimes slow, but always moving forward. The Silver Creek Ranch became a green oasis in the valley, a testament to hard work and shared dreams. Abigail and Kalen were married in a simple ceremony under the shade of a great cottonwood tree. Their union, born from the ashes of tragedy, became a quiet legend in the territory, a symbol of hope and the surprising ways two different worlds could come together to create something strong and beautiful. Their life was a quiet melody of shared purpose. A few years later, their family was completed by the arrival of a son. They named him Daniel, a boy with his mother's determined eyes and his father's quiet spirit. He was the living embodiment of their love, a bridge between their two heritages. He grew up strong and curious, his laughter echoing across the fields where there had once been only silence. The ranch was no longer just a place of work. It was a home filled with warmth, life, and the promise of the future. The ghosts of the past had been laid to rest, replaced by the joyful sounds of a new generation. Daniel learned the lessons of both his parents. From Abigail, he learned to read and write, to manage the ranch's accounts, and to understand the value of his grandfather's legacy. From Kalen, he learned to track animals, to read the signs of the weather in the clouds, and to listen to the ancient language of the land itself. He was a child of two worlds, blessed with the wisdom of both. One afternoon, Kalen took him to the highest ridge overlooking their property. He taught him that true strength was not in owning land, but in protecting what you love with courage and a true heart. Abigail joined them on the ridge, her arms slipping around her husband's waist, as she watched her son look out at his birthright. They stood together, a family silhouetted against the setting sun. She looked at the man beside her and the boy who was their future. and her heart filled with a profound and peaceful gratitude. The journey had been perilous, fraught with loss and terror, but they had walked it together. In the deep, unhurried stillness of the evening, she knew they had built more than a prosperous ranch. They had built a legacy, rooted as deeply as the secret river that gave their valley life.
Our time is over for today. Thank you for your attention. Until the next story.